So much has been happening in South Africa since the elections. It can be hard to keep up,
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind.
definitely. One thing that caught my eye was this article you sent me about the future of the Government of National Unity, the GNU. Um, it really got me thinking about what might happen if the DA and the FF Plus actually left.
Right.
Like, what are the real possibilities?
Yeah, it's a big question because right now the GNU is kind of like this balancing act, you know?
Yeah.
And if some of the key players decide to walk away, it'll change everything. So, in this deep dive, we're going to look at some of the scenarios the article lays out, the GNU without the DA and FF plus D-Day. We'll try to break down what each scenario could mean.
Okay. So the first scenario the article looks at is what happens if the ANC keeps governing with the other parties that are in the GNU now? The DA and the FF Plus are out.
Right.
So what would that do to their power in Parliament, like numbers-wise?
Well, they take a pretty big hit.
Yeah.
The DA's got a lot of seats, 87 of them, and the FF Plus has 6. So if you take those away, the GNU is left with only 194 seats out of 400.
Yeah.
That's less than half, only 48.5%.
Oof. That doesn't sound good for getting things done. What kind of problems could they run into trying to govern without a real majority?
The article talks about a high chance of things getting unstable, and they call it legislative paralysis.
Legislative paralysis.
Yeah.
What's that?
Basically, it means it would be super hard to pass any laws,
Yeah.
even really important ones like the budget. Without a majority, they'd always have to be making deals with other parties to get anything done.
Ugh, that sounds like a mess.
It would be. Things would move really slow, and they might have to water down policies just to get enough votes.
That makes it tough to get anything meaningful done.
Exactly. It makes governing effectively a whole lot harder.
Yeah, I can see that. So what about the markets? How would they react to all this uncertainty? The article brings in economist Davy Root to talk about that. What does he think?
His take is interesting. He says the markets have actually kind of already factored in the possibility of a minority government.
Really?
Yeah. So he doesn't think there would be a huge immediate panic if it actually happened.
Huh, that's surprising. You'd think investors would be freaking out about all the instability.
You would, but it seems like they're already kind of prepared for it.
Interesting. Okay, so the article then looks at another possibility. The ANC could try to team up with other smaller parties to stay in power. Who are they thinking about?
They're looking at parties that have backed them up on important stuff in the past. The article specifically mentions Action SA and maybe even Bebo's.
Okay, so parties they already know they can work with.
Exactly, especially on things like approving budgets.
That makes sense. So let's talk numbers again. How many seats would these new partners bring in?
Well, Action SA has 6 seats.
Okay.
So if they joined the current GNU without the DA and FF plus BOPA, that would bump them up to 200 seats.
Exactly.
Yeah, right on the edge. But if BOSA joined too, it would give them a slightly more comfortable majority.
Even though the article doesn't say how many seats Bose has.
Right. We don't know the exact number from this article.
Okay. But either way, it's still pretty close.
Yeah.
The article also talks about a pretty big change in stance from Herman Mashaba, the leader of Action SA. What's that about?
It is a pretty big deal. Mashaba basically said that if President Ramaphosa asks them to join a GNU without the DA, they would be happy to do it.
Wow, really? He's willing to work with the ANC now.
That's what he's saying. He says it's all about keeping the country stable.
That's a pretty big turnaround from where he was before. He used to be totally against working with the ANC.
Yeah, things change. It sounds like he's thinking more strategically now.
So what does our economist friend, Dottie Verroot, think about this scenario? The ANC teaming up with these smaller parties? Any market jitters there?
Root actually sees this scenario as being pretty similar to the current GNU.
How so?
Well, it would just be different smaller parties filling in for the DA and FF plus.
Right.
So he doesn't think the markets would react too strongly to that either. He says they're more focused on what's happening globally right now.
Okay, so 2 scenarios down, and the markets seem to be pretty chill about both of them. But then the article brings up a third possibility, an alliance between the ANC and the EFF. Now, this one feels like it could really shake things up.
Yeah, this would definitely be a much bigger change. We're talking about the ANC actually bringing the EFF into the government.
Big time.
And the article mentions that some groups within the ANC are actually pushing for this, specifically the RET movement.
Right, those guys. And what about the EFF? Are they up for joining forces with the ANC?
Well, Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF, has been very clear about what it would take. He says the DA and the FF plus have to be out of the picture completely.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Nope. That's his non-negotiable condition.
Got it. So, assuming that happens and the DA and FS Plus do leave, how much power would the ANC and EFF have together?
It would be a pretty big shift. They'd go from a shaky minority to a strong majority.
Let's break it down.
Okay, so the ANC, with the other smaller parties, has 194 seats.
Right.
And the EFF has a pretty big chunk, too.
How many?
39.
39. Okay.
So if you put those together, that gives them 233 seats out of 400.
Whoa, that's over 58%.
58.25% to be exact.
That's a commanding majority.
It is.
The article also briefly mentions the MK party. Could they be a factor in all this?
There's been some talk about them, yeah. They've got 58 seats.
Right, not insignificant.
But the article pretty much rules them out.
Why?
Because they're demanding that President Ramaphosa steps down. That's their one big condition.
Ah, okay. So that's a no-go.
Pretty much. As long as Ramaphosa's in charge, the MK party is not going to join any GNU.
Makes sense. Okay, back to the ANC-EFF team-up. Dowie Root seems a lot more worried about this scenario. What's he saying?
He says this would be really bad news for South Africa.
How bad?
He's predicting a seriously bad reaction from the markets. He even uses the term bomb out.
Whoa. That sounds scary.
He thinks it would spook investors big time.
Even with all the global stuff happening.
He says it would just make everything worse. Like, investors are already a little nervous about South Africa, and this would just confirm their worst fears.
Ouch. So, not good. The article also brings in some analysis from Oxford Economics to get a broader view. What's their take on a possible ANC-EFF government?
They did some analysis on this a while back, looking at different coalition possibilities, and they think that an ANC government with the EFF would probably end up adopting some pretty radical left-wing policies.
More radical than what the ANC usually does.
Yeah. Even if they don't go as far as the EFF wants them to, they'd still be pushed in that direction.
Interesting. And what kind of impact would that have on the economy?
They're worried about a couple of things. First, they think it could lead to a bigger budget deficit.
Because they'd be spending more money on those left-wing policies.
Exactly. And second, they're concerned that it could damage relationships with important countries like the United States.
Because they wouldn't like those radical policies.
Yeah.
So what kind of concrete economic predictions are we talking about here?
Jacques Nel from Oxford Economics Africa made some specific forecasts.
No.
He thinks the rand would weaken, inflation would go up, and economic growth would slow down.
Not great.
Not great. But the article does point out that this is a more moderate view compared to what some in the DA are saying.
What are they saying?
They're predicting total doom and gloom.
Oh, the classic doomsday scenario.
Oh, exactly.
Okay, so we've got three very different scenarios here. A minority government, a partnership with smaller parties, or a coalition with the EFF. It's interesting how each one has different implications for stability, for the markets, and for the direction of the country.
Absolutely. And it's really important to remember that these are just scenarios based on what the article says about the DA and FF plus leaving.
Right.
It's not a crystal ball.
Yeah, we don't know for sure what will happen.
Right. These are just possibilities based on what we know now.
Okay. But they're all possibilities with some pretty big consequences. So, thinking about all this, what do you think is the most important factor that will determine what happens next? Is it political stability? The economy? International relations? What do you think?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's hard to say for sure. Each scenario has its own set of risks and rewards.
Right.
A minority government could bring instability, but it might not spook the markets too much. Partnering with smaller parties could provide more stability, but maybe they won't be able to do much. And the ANC-EFF coalition, well, that has the potential to really shake things up, but not in a good way for the economy.
Yeah, it's a tough call. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out.
Exactly.
Thanks for breaking it all down.
No problem. It's definitely a lot to think about.
You know what? I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about, too. What do you think is the most important factor that will shape South Africa's future? Let us know what you think.